Hello, and welcome to the Jackson Career Explorer webinar. My name is Robin McDougall, and I will be showing you how to get the most out of the JCE report. This webinar was designed for guidance counselors and career professionals who will be walking through the JCE report with their students or clients. However, if you have just taken the JCE for yourself and want to better understand your results, you will probably find this webinar helpful as well. I will be taking you through my own report so that I can speak directly to my own results and give you some background information to help you understand where my results might be coming from. This webinar will be most effective for you if you have your own JCE report sitting in front of you. If you understand your own results well, then I think you will be in a better position to help others understand their results. So we're going to jump right in. We're going to first talk about preparation. I understand that you are all very busy people, but if you do have a few minutes, what I think you should do before you actually sit down with the student is click on the Detailed Scoring Information tab right here. This is because you can see some important information about the validity of the profile on this page. So on the right-hand side of the page under the Administrative Indices subheading, you will see two different scores. These scores give an indication of how meaningful or purposeful the student was or your client was in responding to the Jackson Career Explorer. So the administrative indices are made up of two different scores, the response consistency score and the response infrequency index. As you can see, I received normal scores on both of these indices, but your students may have received different scores than I did. So I'm going to explain the different types of scores you might receive and when they might be problematic. The response consistency index indicates how consistent the student was in responding to the items of the assessment. So it can give an indication of how random they may have been in responding to the items. A score of 0.5 and above is acceptable. However, the student will be issued a mild warning if he or she receives a score of less than 0.5 and will be issued a strong warning, less than 0.2. So it's these types of scores that you're going to have to look for to determine whether it might be cause for concern. Now, in younger students or in students in which their responses are not quite, or their interests are not quite solidified yet, a moderate to low response consistency score might be expected, and that they may not be as consistent as someone who's very certain about what they like and dislike. Now I'm going to talk about response infrequency score, which is an indication of how atypical the set of students' responses is. So we have analyses and research that show us what typical responses to this assessment might look like, and when the student does not fall into that pattern, it can indicate, again, random responses because there are certain items that are being flagged that are not typically endorsed, for example. Now, in some cases, this does not mean anything problematic. It could simply mean that your student has interests that are fairly atypical, and that's okay. If the response infrequency index is 0.2 or lower, it's cause for slight concern at least. And if it's 0.1 or lower, the student will be issued a strong warning. Now, one of these scores in isolation might not be necessarily a problem. However, if the response consistency score is elevated and the response infrequency score is very low, so in other words, if you fall outside of the normal range on both of them, then the best course of action would be to recommend that the student retake the JCE at a later point in time, or at least at a point in time when the student is interested and motivated and committed to taking the assessment in a serious and purposeful manner. Now that we're on this page, we're going to talk about the different scores that you can interpret. The default is the combined tab. So you'll see here under the basic interests heading that there are three tabs: combined, male, and female. The combined tab simply means that the scores reflect both males and females, and the male and female scores indicate that you can look at how your students' scores compare against just the males and just the females. Back to the combined tab now. We're going to talk about raw scores. Raw scores simply reflect exactly how the student responded to the assessment. In other words, it takes the sum of the student's responses to all of the items on the scale. As you can see, the raw scores can range from 25 to 5. I have several 25s, well, 3 here: law, mediation and persuasion, and social science. What this means is that I answered 5 or strongly like to all of the items that make up these scales. So they are very strong interests for me. Some of your students may not have raw scores of 25. They may not have chosen to answer so strongly to all of the items, and that's okay. You're just trying to look at which basic interests received the highest raw scores. On the other hand, at the bottom, we can see raw scores of 5, or the lowest you can possibly get. So for me, I received the lowest possible score on 5 different basic interests. What this means is I answered 1 or strongly disliked to all of the items that make up these scales. So for example, performing arts. So what we can learn from this is I don't particularly like getting up on stage and performing in front of people in a play, for example. If you want to know a bit more about what is actually being measured, please take a look at the definitions of the basic interests. So you can hover over each basic interest and receive the description. So for example, law at the top, I'm hovering over it and you can see the text box that comes up. You can also click on the law or whatever basic interest you're looking to learn more about, and a new window will open in which that interest is at the top, but you can also scroll up and down to see all of the basic interest descriptions. Now we're going to talk about percentile scores. Percentile scores are different from raw scores because they are relative scores. They reflect how your students' interests compare with the interests of other people who have taken the JCE. So in other words, we're comparing their results with those of their peers. Their peers are those that make up the norm group. So at times you may hear me referring to the norm group, and that's basically a group of students who have taken the JCE in the past. That's who makes up our norm group. We like you to focus on the combined score, and hence that's why it is the default tab that is presented on this page. However, you can also look at the other tabs as we talked about before, because males and females do tend to show different response patterns. So you can see scores shift slightly when I flip to the different tabs. An example of when you might want to look at a different tab is when the student that you're counseling is considering entering a profession or a career area that is not typical of their gender. So for example, if a male is entering the social service area, or if they have a high interest in this area, you may want to click on the male tab and see how he compares against his male peers. This could reinforce that his interests in social service are higher than a lot of his male peers, and could present a competitive advantage for him when he's actually pursuing this type of job in the workforce. For example, when he goes to apply for that job, being a male in a typically female-dominated field may make the employer see him as someone who can offer something unique to the position.